Maybe you've experienced this before. You're in a meeting, a family dinner, a group of friends, or just a completely normal conversation. And then, someone says something. Not harsh enough to be considered a direct insult, but not harmless enough for you to genuinely ignore. Maybe they mock your opinion. Maybe they bring up an old mistake. Maybe they make fun of your job. Or maybe they simply say something that makes everyone around you laugh. Everyone except you. And the worst part is that everyone heard it. A few people laugh along. A few stay silent. A few look away as if they don't want to get involved. And your heart starts beating faster. Your face gets hot. Your mind goes blank. You know exactly what just happened. You know they just disrespected you. But you don't know what to say. So in the end, you laugh it off. Or change the subject. Or pretend you don't care. But hours later, that moment is still sitting in your mind. You start thinking, I should have said this. I should have responded right away. I shouldn't have stayed silent. And the more you think about it, the more frustrated you become. But here's what most people don't realize. What hurts you isn't necessarily what they said. It's the feeling of helplessness inside yourself. The feeling that in the moment that mattered most, you didn't know what to do. If you've ever experienced that feeling, comment the number 1 below. Just to see how many people have found themselves in that exact situation. Because today, we're going to talk about exactly what to do when someone publicly disrespects you in front of other people. Not how to win an argument. Not how to make them shut up. But how to keep your calm, your dignity, and your self-respect. And everything begins with a truth that most people completely misunderstand. So why do moments like this bother us so much? Most people have the same immediate thought. When someone publicly disrespects them, they instantly conclude, this person hates me. This person is trying to put me down. This person wants everyone to think less of me. And sometimes that's true. But not always. Because there's an interesting truth about people who frequently disrespect others in public. Many times, their behavior says far more about them than it does about you. Think about it this way. Have you ever met someone who always needs to be the smartest person in the room? Always needs to be right. Always needs to win. Always needs to have the last word. If someone has a good idea, they immediately look for flaws. If someone shares an achievement, they immediately share a bigger one. If someone attracts attention, they find a way to pull that attention back to themselves. Why? Because some people do not feel powerful by lifting themselves up. They only feel powerful by pulling other people down. And that is a huge difference. Truly confident people do not need to embarrass others. They do not need to prove anything. They do not need to make someone else the target. But insecure people often do the opposite. They use ridicule. They use sarcasm. They use jokes designed to make other people look smaller. Not because they are strong, but because they are trying to hide something inside themselves. And this is the important part. That does not mean you should accept disrespect. It does not mean you should ignore everything. But it does allow you to see the situation from a completely different perspective. Instead of thinking, I am being attacked, you begin to realize, I am watching someone who is trying to prove something. That shift alone can remove a huge amount of emotional weight. Because when you see them as a threat, you react with fear. But when you begin to see what is happening inside them, you react with observation. And that is a much more powerful position. Because remember this. Someone who publicly disrespects you is usually expecting a reaction. They expect you to get angry. They expect you to lose your composure. They expect you to become defensive. They expect you to prove that their comment hit its target. That reaction is what gives them the feeling of victory. But if you refuse to react the way they expect, the entire situation begins to change. And that is why the next principle is more important than any clever comeback. Because in moments like these, the winner is not the person who speaks the best. It is the person who keeps control of themselves the best. And this is where most people make a mistake. They think the goal is to win the confrontation. To respond quickly. To say something sharp enough to silence the other person. But the harder you try to do that, the easier it becomes to lose control. Because in moments of disrespect, emotion always arrives before reason. Your heart starts beating faster. Your body becomes tense. Your brain shifts into defense mode. And when that happens, we usually react in one of two ways. The first is to explode. You get angry. You argue. You try to prove that you're right. You try to make the other person pay for what they just did. But the more you talk, the more out of control you feel. And everyone around you can see it. The second reaction is to shrink. You stay quiet. Laugh it off. Pretend nothing happened. But inside, you're swallowing all of that anger. And when you get home, the entire situation starts replaying in your head. At first glance, these two reactions seem completely different. But they actually have something important in common. Both come from losing control of the situation. One person loses control through anger. The other loses control through fear. And that is why you need to remember the most important principle in this entire video. The first person to lose control is the first person to lose. Think about the people you genuinely respect. When they are under pressure, are they usually the loudest person in the room? Usually not. When they are criticized, are they the person who reacts the most strongly? Not usually. The people who seem the strongest often share one thing in common. They are difficult to shake. Not because they don't have emotions, but because they do not allow their emotions to control their actions. That is what makes other people perceive them as powerful. Because real power is not the ability to control other people. It is the ability to control yourself. And the interesting thing is, people who enjoy publicly disrespecting others are usually waiting for one thing. A reaction. They want to see you get angry. They want to see you become confused. They want to see you lose your composure. Because that moment makes them feel like they are in control. But if you refuse to give them what they want, the entire situation changes. That is why before you think about what to say, before you think about how to respond, you must learn to do something much simpler. Keep your calm. Because the person who earns the most respect in the room is not the person who speaks the loudest. It is the person who remains composed when everyone else starts losing theirs. And in the next section, we're going to talk about the first technique. A simple action that sounds almost too small to matter, but one that can completely change the energy of an entire room in just a few seconds. So the very first thing you should do when someone publicly disrespects you is pause. Don't react immediately. Don't respond immediately. Don't try to prove anything immediately. Just pause. 1 or 2 seconds. Take a breath. Look at them. Keep your face calm. It sounds simple. But that brief pause is exactly what most people are unable to do. Because when we feel disrespected, the brain wants to react instantly. It wants to defend itself. It wants to fight back. It wants to regain status. But the person who controls the situation is rarely the person who reacts the fastest. It's the person who reacts with intention. That pause gives you something incredibly valuable: time. Time for your emotions to settle. Time to think clearly. And most importantly, time to keep control in your own hands. Because the person who just disrespected you is waiting for a reaction. Don't be too quick to give them one. After you've managed to stay calm, there is another thing you need to remember. Don't make the confrontation the center of attention. Because that is exactly what the disrespectful person wants. They want everyone watching your reaction. They want to see you become uncomfortable. They want to see you get angry. They want to see you lose control. But if you refuse to give them that, everything begins to change. Instead of focusing on how to respond, focus on observing. Observe what just happened. Observe how that person is behaving. Observe the reactions of the people around you. Because the moment you stop seeing yourself as the target, you begin to become the observer of the situation. And the observer almost always has more power than the person reacting emotionally. The interesting thing is, many people only appear powerful when someone else loses their composure. But when you remain calm, they start losing that advantage. Suddenly, people are no longer focused on you. They begin paying attention to the behavior of the person who created the awkward moment. And sometimes, that alone is enough to completely reverse the situation. And here is the next technique. It may also be the one that feels the hardest to use. Because it requires calmness. Not to stay silent, but to say out loud what everyone in the room is already thinking. When someone publicly disrespects you, a lot of people notice it. They just don't say anything. They pretend nothing happened. And that silence often allows the other person to walk away without paying any social cost for their behavior. That is why sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply name the behavior. Calmly. Directly. For example, that sounded a little disrespectful. Or, I'm not sure that was meant as a joke. You're not angry. You're not attacking them. You're not arguing. You're simply describing what just happened. And that creates a very interesting effect. Because the moment the behavior is named, the other person can no longer hide behind phrases like, I was only joking. You're being too sensitive. I didn't mean anything by it. Now, everyone can clearly see what just happened. You are not trying to embarrass them. You are simply turning on the light. And many disrespectful behaviors only survive in the dark. The moment the light appears, they begin to lose their power. But before we finish, there is one important thing we need to talk about. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, again and again, then the problem is no longer their comment. The problem is what they have learned about you. Because people who like testing other people's boundaries rarely start with something big. They start small, a joke, a sarcastic remark, an interruption, a tiny act of disrespect. And then they watch. If nothing happens, they take another step. Then another. And another. Until one day, they feel completely comfortable disrespecting you in front of other people. That is why staying calm in the moment is so important. But it is not enough. Because after the situation is over, you need clarity. Not anger. Not emotion. Just clarity. Sometimes a single sentence is enough. That shouldn't happen again. That's it. No lecture. No threats. No argument. Confident people do not speak in circles. They speak clearly. And people who spend their lives testing other people's boundaries understand that better than anyone. Because they have spent their entire lives looking for people who are too uncomfortable to say what they really think. Don't become one of those people. Be calm, but be clear. Be polite, but have boundaries. Be respectful, but not easy to disrespect. And if someone has ever publicly disrespected you in front of other people, comment the number 9 below. I'd genuinely like to know what was hardest for you. Staying calm, finding the right words, or stopping yourself from replaying the entire situation in your head after it was already over. Let me know in the comments. And remember this. Respect is not something other people give you. It is something you establish by deciding what you will and will not allow from others.